John Schneider and the Seahawks are not strangers when it comes to making trades in August heading into a new season. Could they pull another move to upgrade a position of need before week 1 against the Rams? Dallas Cooper and I are going to be dishing out some trade proposals here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined for our Thursday episode by my co-host, Dallas Cooper, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in from Palm Springs, California, or overseas in London. Thanks for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Only a couple days away from the preseason finale at Lambeau Field, Dallas and I will be dishing out our Fab Five, 5 players with the most to gain this weekend, playing in Titletown, heading towards the regular season. And we'll have our What to Watch on defense, key storylines on the defensive side of the football. Jam-packed episode coming your way, courtesy of our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Now for your lead story here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. During his 13-plus seasons as general manager of the Seahawks, John Schneider has made a number of trades during the month of August, even in early September, before the start of the regular season. Just a few notable ones that they've made: trading for Justin Coleman from the New England Patriots. They also got Jacob Hollister from the New England Patriots. Both those trades ended up paying dividends for Seattle, bringing in quality football players on offense and defense. Maybe not the splashy trades that fans are looking for, but guys that came in and had an impact, made positive contributions for the Seahawks. John Schneider has always been aggressive this time of year when it comes to looking for trades. And Dallas, it feels like this month that there could be some fairly decent trades that happen, because there's a number of teams out there that are already trying to sell a certain number of players. We've seen the Trey Lance rumors in San Francisco. And by the way, neither one of us are going to be dishing a trade proposal for Trey Lance. That's not going to be happening. Jonathan Taylor, the Seahawks don't have any reason to try to make a trade for him with the Colts. And Chris Jones, I don't see him going anywhere. And if the Chiefs did trade him, you're going to have to give up a king's ransom. So we're going to be realistic here, Dallas, looking at potential trade proposals. But I know that there is a big name out there that you think that the Seahawks could get if they made the right offer. And it's a team that I actually mentioned a few moments ago, the Indianapolis Colts.
Yes, Corbin, there's a lot of teams that have been in turmoil this offseason. A lot of things going on with contract situations, positions playing out. But we talked about the Seahawks lacking splash trades, especially around this time. Well, this, Corbin, is the definition of a splash trade, getting an all-pro like a guy, DeForest Buckner. This would completely change the defensive outlook of the Seattle Seahawks. Having DeForest Buckner going along with Draymond Jones, Uchenna Nwosu along that front line will make the Seahawks an upper echelon defensive front. And that will be a big difference from last season. And they will be giving up Darrell Taylor and a 4th-round pick. That is my trade proposal. If anything, I'd be even more so giving up a 3rd-round pick or a 2nd if they even want that. That's how much of a great player DeForest Buckner is and how much impact he could bring to the Seahawks defense. This would be everything that they want and need. Fans have been clamoring for run defense to get better and interior pass rush. The Seahawks have the edge group that they need. They need that interior guy, and DeForest Buckner will be that lead dog along the line.
Buckner's been an underrated run defender for a number of years in San Francisco and with the Colts, and he's one of just 4 interior defensive linemen that's had at least 5.5 sacks each of the last 4 years. Draymond Jones is one of those 4 as well. So Seattle would have 2 of those 4 players if they were able to pull that off. And it's interesting. We were polling some of our listeners before the show about this, and there actually were a couple proposals that had Darrell Taylor going to the Colts as part of a trade package to get DeForest Buckner. It feels like those are the kind of trades that happen this time of year. Teams don't want to give up high draft picks in August, early September, but if they have a surplus at one position and another team needs help there, you can find trades where you are able to piece together, hey, you need an edge rusher like Darrell Taylor, we'll give it to you. We like what our depth looks like there, but we need interior. You guys have a surplus there, so let's mix and match. And so maybe that's a trade that could happen on that front. I'm going to go a little different direction here, and this is not a trade proposal that I would have been dishing out if Jackson Smith-Njigba didn't injure his wrist. I just personally have reservations about the idea that he's going to be back the first couple of games coming off this injury. To me, it is not the same as Tyler Lockett. Pete Carroll can say whatever he wants, but a wrist is much different than a small bone in a hand. And maybe he does come back by week 1 or week 2, but I can see him missing 3 or 4 games. And I think Seattle, with the other injuries they've got at the position, Bill Belichick and John Schneider, they have worked together a lot. I already mentioned Justin Coleman trade, Jacob Hollister trade. They have made several trades this time of year. And I have another one that I propose here. Kendrick Bourne, who's a familiar name to Seahawks fans. He played for the San Francisco 49ers at the beginning of his career. He's had a really solid preseason. New England added some receivers this offseason in the draft and free agency, including Juju Smith-Schuster. I feel like Bourne is a player that could be had for a late-round pick. And even when Jackson Smith-Njigba comes back, this is a guy that can play in the slot. He can play outside. He's got special teams ability. He's a veteran that has played, as I said, in San Francisco. I just feel like he's the kind of team player that would be a nice addition for the Seahawks. And he could maybe be that Marquise Goodwin type player. Not the same style of player, but a guy that can come in and contribute for you, put up some numbers, especially while you're waiting to get Jackson Smith-Njigba back. Derek Young's potentially going to be out for quite some time too. They've got injury issues there. I would give up a late round pick to make that happen with the New England Patriots. Again, a team that John Schneider's worked with a lot this time of year.
Yes, he has. And for me, going off of that, the team, same exact team, Dietrich Wise, the interior rusher for the Patriots, that is a guy also where if we're not making a splash play, trying to give up Darrell Taylor and the fourth for a bigger name like Buckner, and you're just trying to give up a mid-round to late-round pick, Dietrich Wise is an interesting name as he's been a guy giving consistent pressure along the interior, constantly has a 5 technique, has times even playing 4-eye and 3 technique purely on the interior, yet also times as a stand-up edge rusher, very versatile, and that's why he's been lauded in the Belichick system over the past couple of years, and he's been there just giving consistent pressure and consistent run defense, which was the biggest issue for Seattle. Run defense is going to be the key factor this season, and Dietrich Wise will surely bring that up if they could somehow get him on the team.
Yeah, I was looking at Lawrence Guy as another player on the defensive line for the Patriots that could make sense. A little older player at 33, but if you could get Dietrich Wise, he does have a cap hit north of $8 million. So I think Seattle could absorb that, but it would almost put him up against the 0 mark. So I know John Schneider is not comfortable with that. He wants to have a little wiggle room in the season when injuries and stuff happen. So that would be a trade that might be a little more complicated. You might have to include a player in there sending back just to try to offset a little bit of that salary. As for my second trade proposal, this is one I've been thinking about for quite some time, and I don't know if the Baltimore Ravens would be willing to do it. I do know this, though, Dallas. Marlon Humphrey could miss the first 6, 7, 8 games this season. He had surgery, and one of the best corners in football is out. They've got some depth there in Baltimore, but they also could use another player that has started a number of games, and Seattle badly needs that 320-plus pound nose tackle that can really stuff the middle. And to me, Michael Pierce makes all the sense in the world. You see the picture, those of you watching on YouTube, he is a massive human being. We've mentioned before a guy that has his own orbit. This guy, I think, has his own galaxy. He is a massive human being, a very good player. He's had some injuries. He only played, I think, in 1 or 2 games last year, but he's fully healthy. He's been a Pro Bowl caliber player for multiple seasons in his career. He's played in a 3-4 defense. He's played in a 4-3. The guy has some versatility for a 330 plus pound nose tackle. I think if you offered Mike Jackson and a 7th round pick, so you offer a guy that started all 17 games, is still a young player in Mike Jackson. I think he's a good scheme fit for what Baltimore likes to do. And you throw a 7th round pick in there, I at least think you can get Baltimore to listen, because they are going to need another corner that can fill in there until they get Marlon Humphrey back. There's some optimism, like with Jackson Smith and Jigba, that maybe we can get him back on the field in quick order. But there's a chance Humphrey could miss a big chunk of this season after having surgery. And so they're going to be looking for some cornerback help. Mike Jackson is a cheap, affordable option. Seattle's going to likely be starting either Trey Brown or Devin Witherspoon, that outside spot. This is where you flex your muscle a little bit with the depth you have at one position to upgrade an area of need. Baltimore's got some other options at the nose tackle position on the roster that are capable, that developed last year when Michael Pierce was out. So this would be a trade that I would love to see the Seahawks pull off. I don't know if any of these actually happen, but all 4 of those, I think, are at least realistic in terms of the compensation and the type of players you'd be getting back in the month of August, heading towards the start of the regular season. Coming up next, we're going to be looking at our Fab Five, 5 players with the most to gain or potentially lose in Saturday's preseason finale against the Packers. Don't go away. You're listening to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks, which is brought your way by our friends at Game Time. If you've ever been on the hunt for sports or concert tickets at the last minute, like when I was trying to buy Kraken playoff tickets, the process can be anxiety-provoking. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you, with killer deals on last-minute tickets and the best price guarantee. You can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have if you're wanting to see the Seahawks' final preseason game at Lambeau on Saturday and have an itch to put together a last-minute road trip. Using Game Time's awesome flash deals feature and a detailed stadium map, you can get awesome seats for under $50 right now. It's super easy. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event, and Game Time's guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section or row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Terms apply. You're listening to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined for today's show by my co-host, Dallas Cooper. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. For our everydayers out there, we are going to be dishing out our picks to click and maybe making some projections for this upcoming preseason game in a jam-packed Blue Friday episode. You won't want to miss it. Let's get to our Fab Five, Dallas. 5 players that have the most to gain or potentially lose heading into this preseason finale. Now, I will admit it, the last preseason game, it doesn't matter whether it was the 4th one or now the 3rd one, it can be a little bit difficult to get through the 4 quarters because typically teams don't play starters much, if at all. With that being said, this feels like a season for the Seahawks where there are still a few roster spots that are hanging in the balance, and there are a number of players that still have an opportunity to either play themselves on the right side of the bubble or play themselves off of it heading into cuts next week.
Yes, and a name we were interested in talking about with this Fab Five. First, Corbin, we talked about Jake Bobo, and we're a little different on this where, Corbin, you feel like Bobo has shown enough where he shouldn't be touching the field. But for me, as an undrafted rookie, I feel he needs every opportunity that he can to prove himself. If he can further himself and even shoot himself even further up the depth chart and cement himself as that 4th wide receiver, maybe you don't even need to make a move if Jackson Smith-Njigba has to miss time and he can step in as the number 3. I think he needs every rep possible, especially with this Green Bay game. You need to find out what you have in Bobo. Is he just a great preseason wide receiver that is going to be a decent depth option during the regular season? Or you might have found a steal as an undrafted free agent, and you might have somebody who can get you significant snaps in the regular season. you need to figure it out as quick as possible. And the best way is to just give him as much reps as possible, even in the preseason. My next guy would be Levi Bell. And Levi Bell, as Corbin, we talked about last week, you had the interview with him. Levi Bell has done everything he can to make this roster. He's played some snaps at interior. He's played snaps at edge and done great at both. Heck, he's even been in fullback and lined up at fullback. He's done everything you could ask for to make this roster. And he's going to have to prove himself again because of that battle that is going on in the bottom part of the edge position group.
Yeah, him and Tyreek Smith right now are maybe battling for one spot. And Tyreek Smith had a very solid game last week, although I felt Levi Bell was still the more disruptive player of the two. He had 3 run stops inside 2 yards. He had 3 pressures. Tyreek Smith had 1 at the end of the game when Will Grier basically ran 50 yards backwards and was just trying to heave up something for a desperation 4th-down throw, and nothing was there. He gets sacked. So it was a great play. But I feel like Levi Bell has been the more consistent, disruptive player. The question all boils down to, obviously, which player the Seahawks still think has the highest ceiling, because Bell has a lot of traits for an undrafted guy. And Tyreek Smith athletically doesn't quite stack up, but he had some good plays against the run. So I could have put both those guys on my list, but I'm actually going to be looking at a few other position groups in this football game. And you mentioned Jake Bobo. I'm going to stick with what I said. I think Bobo should be in bubble wrap. I'm not playing him in this football game. He can warm up and do stuff, but I've seen enough. If I'm the Seahawks, I know what I've got in Jake Bobo. I need him in week 1 against the Rams, so I'm going to keep him healthy. But there's another undrafted rookie receiver. Matt Landers returned to practice yesterday. This would be a great opportunity for Matt Landers to make this football team, because you don't have Tariq Young healthy. You don't have D. Eskridge. He's injured and suspended start of the season. And you don't have Jackson Smith and Jigba. You need another great athlete at that position that can take the top off the defense. And Landers has played a little bit of special teams. I want to be able to see what that third phase of the game looks like for him, though, coming off this injury. I think it's an important game for him. And staying on the offensive side of the ball, SaRodorick Thompson Jr., the running back out of Texas Tech, I think he's had a very impressive training camp in preseason for Seattle. And now that Brian Koback has been waived, it feels like the door has been opened like the size of a garage for him to get that practice squad position. And heck, if Kenny McIntosh isn't able to be ready by week 1, I think he will be, especially based on what Carroll said the other day. But if they need SaRodorick Thompson in week 1 as a depth option, he has proven himself with his ability to run the ball as a slasher and break some tackles, create yards after contact, decent pass protection as well. So I want to see it again, though. Can he do it in Green Bay on the road? The Packers are expected to play some starters in this game. SaRodorick Thompson could have a chance against better competition to be able to prove himself even more. So I'm going to be watching both those players on offense, but I know that we also have some other defensive players that we're going to be watching closely as well.
Oh, of course. We got going back to the edge rushing spot, as we talked about, that battle between Levi Bell and Tyreek Smith is going to be a very interesting one. As you said, Tyreek Smith isn't the athlete that Levi Bell is, but if you're coming off of pass rush technique and pure ability to just get by the offensive tackle and bend the edge, Tyreek Smith is the better guy in terms of that. But the power that Bell brings is going to be interesting to watch what they do with that edge battle at the bottom of the depth chart. But let's also bring up Patrick O'Connell as the depth linebacker piece. What a revelation this has been. The linebacker spot in the offseason, Corbin, I was extremely worried about it, especially with the lack of free agency moves. You sign back Bobby Wagner, and you get Devin Bush, but you don't really do too much splash moves other than that. Yet the depth on the linebacker position, even though Cody Barton left Seattle from last season, Jordan Brooks is out. Wow. They actually were decent. There was times, yes, it was a struggle, but Patrick O'Connell might be something that they've found to be a quality depth piece, especially giving you snaps on special teams. And then Corbin, Trey Brown. As we said, this cornerback position group is immensely talented. There is so much starting potential within this group, and some guys are just getting lost in the fold. this is an immense opportunity for Trey Brown to cement himself as the guy opposite of Tariq Woolen in week 1.
He's the one that was able to create a little bit of a push last week with the interception, a tackle for loss. Mike Jackson struggled in his limited action. So we'll see what happens on Saturday, who plays, who doesn't, but this is a big game for him. I'm going to be looking on the defensive side of the football in the middle of the trenches because Mike Morris might be out for a significant amount of time. We don't know. Pete Carroll just said he had a shoulder procedure. We don't know whether that means they actually did like cutting him open and he had surgery, or, if it was some other kind of procedure, but we don't know any of those details. If Mike Morris is out for any amount of time, I would think Jacob Sykes is going to be the one that right now is the front runner to win that spot. I had him on the 53 before this news came out. So I want to see another strong performance from him against Green Bay. I think he's going to get a lot of snaps early in this football game and play into the second half. This is a chance for him to solidify his standing. And you mentioned the linebacker depth. I want to watch John Radigan because I'm not going to say that he's played poor football, but I've been a little disappointed by what I've seen from him, particularly the coverage stuff. I just don't know if he's got the movement skills to be able to play linebacker in today's NFL in coverage. The run defense was better last week, so I will give him credit there. I was expecting him to be better than that. He missed several tackles in the first game against the Vikings. He was much better last week, but I need to see a big step forward from him in coverage. Otherwise, a guy like Patrick O'Connell maybe could push for that roster spot. As good of a special teams player as Radigan is, that only goes so far, and O'Connell has made some plays in the special teams. So I think this is a big game for John Radigan to really try to cement that last linebacker spot for the Seahawks. And Jarek Reed II is the other player that I'm going to be watching closely. And I've been critical of him because there have been too many mistakes on the field. There were some assignment-related issues early in training camp. Pete Carroll talked about him swimming a little bit, trying to figure out multiple positions. That's understandable. He's playing both safety spots. He's playing slot corner. His coverage has been good in the preseason. He's only been targeted once, and he broke it up. But the run defense, the tackling has been atrocious. He's missed 4 tackles in the preseason so far. He's come up and he hasn't been able to wrap guys up, get them to the ground. That's not what I saw in his college tape. Can he show a major improvement in that regard in Green Bay? If he's able to come up and make tackles and he doesn't have the misses he's had, that could be the difference between him being a practice squad guy and making this roster as the final safety. So I think there's a lot of pressure on the 6th round pick here, who right now he's probably the draft pick that has the most tenuous position in terms of making this roster because of the emergence of Jonathan Sutherland. So I'm going to be watching 32 closely. I'm hoping to see him make some plays in Seattle secondary, and I want to see much cleaner tackling like I saw from him at New Mexico. It's not something I anticipated seeing in his first preseason. That was a strength on his film. I want to see him get back to the basics, get guys to the ground, and be the hitter that he is capable of being. Let's get our attention now to what to watch on defense. It's really a good segue because I'm sure we'll be talking safeties during this segment. But Dallas, looking at this game on Saturday at Lambeau, as I mentioned earlier in the show, sometimes these last preseason games can be really tricky to evaluate because starters don't play at all for the most part. Green Bay is expected to play some, including Jordan Love. He needs the snaps, but Seattle probably not going to be playing very many of their starters, if any of them, in this football game. But that doesn't mean that there's not value, particularly on the defensive side of the football. And I know there's one position group in particular that you are really excited to see how a handful of guys can try to make a strong closing statement in this exhibition season.
This is Corbin. There's a position group, and it's the edge rushing position group. Which guy is going to shoot up the depth chart and force these coaches to move them up and get them quality snaps in the regular season? Because we've been witnessing this battle go on. We're seeing the rotation in the preseason. Mafe seems to have cemented himself as one of those top 3 or top 2 guys opposite of Nwosu in competition with guys like Taylor. Hall seems in that tier below where Hall is more with he's more with Tyreek Smith and Levi Bells almost, because I don't think Hall is really getting the same amount of snaps as guys like Mafe, and he's not going to be expected to, especially in his rookie season. this is going to be interesting as which edge guy is going to make the coaches move him up. Because at the end of the day, the edge rusher or the position or the player that does this is going to just have to force the coaches to do it. The coaches aren't going to be asking around, isn't going to be wondering. Fans are going to see who's the guy that steps up. And it's going to be interesting to see. Is it Levi Bell? Is it the rookie Derek Hall? Who will it be? That's what I'm going to be watching for this weekend in Green Bay.
Yeah, this is really about rotation and how many snaps you're going to be getting. This is a very competitive position group across the board where you've got Mafe that has emerged as the other starter. I don't see any way that he's not starting in week one, especially because Darrell Taylor hasn't gotten back on the practice field yet. But you're going to have Mafe and Nwosu. They want to have as many guys rotating in as they can, though. They want to keep their edge rushers fresh. So this is a prime opportunity for Derek Hall, who's had flashes this preseason, but it's been a little bit up and down. Can you get a big third game from him here against Green Bay? Is Tyreek Smith going to build off the performance from last week, or does Levi Bell continue to step up and say, hey, I will not be ignored. I need to be part of this edge rushing rotation as well. So I agree with you. I think it's going to be fun to see how those secondary guys, I don't expect to see much of Boye Mafe in this game. Maybe they'll play him a few drives just because he still is a second-year player that is trying to get more experience. But I anticipate it's mostly going to be the Tyreek Smith and Levi Bell show for most of this game. And maybe Jordan Ferguson gets some snaps in the second half as well after being re-signed. He's not going to be a candidate to make the team, but maybe he can play himself into a practice squad spot for the Seahawks. We'll have to wait and see, but that's going to be a lot of fun. I want to go back to the cornerback discussion, though, because the big question for me with this defense, other than obviously the defensive tackle position, is still one where you're wondering what you're going to get in the regular season from that group. They've been solid in the preseason, but does that carry over to the games that actually count in the standings? The other question I've got, is there going to be any clarity at who's going to be starting at the left cornerback position? Because entering last week's game, I felt like Mike Jackson had started to solidify his standing as that starter at left cornerback, but there's still the Devin Witherspoon situation that is clouding over this because Pete Carroll keeps bringing it up. Well, when we get Devin Witherspoon back, it feels like the number 5 overall pick. If they can just get him back on the field, he is doing walkthroughs this week, but if you can get him back doing team and individual drills next week and get him ready for the regular season, it still feels like he is lurking in the shadows to take that job. And at the same time, Trey Brown's looking to build off the way that he played last week, getting the pick, getting the pass breakup, getting the tackle for a loss. There were a few mistakes in the game from him. He's still been kind of inconsistent in these first 2 weeks, but he was able to make up ground, if not pass over Mike Jackson in this very tight competition. So I want to see if we find out any more clarity at that position. I would think if they're going to play starters, that is still an area they haven't decided yet. You got to play Mike Jackson. You got to play Trey Brown. You got to figure out what you're going to be doing at that spot. Reek Woolen's going to be starting right corner week 1, but who is across from him? And is Devin Witherspoon, even not playing in this game against the Packers, is he's still very much in that mix as well? I want to see some clarity at that cornerback spot.
And piggybacking off of that, I'm going to go and stay in that defensive back room. And this time I'm just going to shift over to the safety group. And my question and what to watch for with against the Packers this weekend is who is going to be that fourth safety? Who is going to be the last safeties on the roster? As we just talked about it, Corbin, you brought up Jarek Reed, but you've also brought up the fact that Sutherland's emergence has really made this interesting competition, as you already know who your top 3 safeties are. You got Diggs, you got Adams, and you got Julian Love. You have versatility within those top 3 guys. Now it's who's that fourth guy that's going to be that special teams guy, going to provide snaps, and maybe be a guy that can accentuate both positions if any one of them are out, which is what's going to be very interesting. As you talked about with Jarek Reed, he's gotten snaps at both positions. Sutherland, not so much, but it will be interesting as maybe Sutherland starts getting snaps at free safety as well, and they want to see what they have over there. This is going to be something to watch for as a certain depth position to really look at.
And Joey Blunt is back too. He's been practicing this week. So he is probably going to get some snaps in this game. I think that he is on the roster at this point. And because of Jamal Adams' situation, as of the time that we are doing this show, Adams still is not off the PUP list, even though Pete Carroll made it sound like it was going to be happening in the next few days. Maybe later today that'll happen. But at this point, he is still not off the PUP list. So with that situation, you're going to probably have an extra safety that you're going to be keeping around until he is able to return and he's able to show I'm ready to play on Sundays. And so maybe you have Blunt and either Sutherland or Reed, but this is very much still a competition that's wide open for one of those last roster spots. And Sutherland's dealing with a little bit of a groin injury. So who knows if he plays on Saturday. It does open the door again for Jarek Reed. If he can play well against Green Bay, being a 6th-round pick, having more athletic traits, a little more versatility in terms of playing the back end, he can still play his way back on this roster. And so availability sometimes is the most important thing when we're looking at these roster spots. And if Sutherland, unfortunately, is not able to play, that might be a difference maker for the Seahawks heading into this preseason finale. And I want to talk linebackers to close things off because, as you mentioned, this is not a position that I was overly optimistic about the depth going in. And I'm going to be honest, I disagree with you to an extent. I'm not quite as impressed with the depth at this point, because I feel like O'Connell has done some nice things. I've also seen some plays where he's gotten blocked easily, hasn't been able to get off blocks. I've seen a few missed tackles from him. John Radigan, I mentioned earlier, the coverage issues. I really wanted to see Vi Jones, and unfortunately, a sprained ankles prevented him from playing in the preseason. He's not ready to return this week either, so we didn't get to see him. Ben Burr-Kirvin's a great story. I just don't think that he is a 53-man roster caliber player based on what I've seen here in these first couple of preseason games. So yes, there's some names, there's some guys that have made a few plays, but I have some question marks still there. And are any of these players going to warrant a roster spot? Because if Jordan Brooks is back and you've got Devin Bush and Bobby Wagner, you might not need to keep anybody else because you've got Nick Bellore as that insurance linebacker. So is a reserve linebacker going to pop enough to stake a claim to a roster spot, whether that's Radigan, whether that's O'Connell, Ben Burr-Kirvin? If one of those guys can have a big game, make a play or two on special teams as well, maybe this discussion turns into having 4 linebackers that are on the roster in week 1, because Jordan Brooks is trending towards being ready to go in week 1. If you've got those 3 at the top, I don't know if you need anybody else. So this is going to be a big game for those reserves. Can any of them show, hey, we are good enough to be on this roster, and we should be because of our special teams ability. We're making enough plays on defense that we can be counted on if there's injuries. So that is a position group that I'm going to be watching very closely in this game to see if any of those players pop and show that they are 53-man roster worthy. Because at this point, I'm not sure if I feel like any of those players have been consistent enough so far to warrant inclusion on this roster, especially with a healthy Jordan Brooks coming back. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Dallas at Dallas C. Cooper. Subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to be wrapping up our preview of the preseason finale in Green Bay. We'll be looking at our Seahawks picks to click for the final week of the preseason and much more. You won't want to miss it. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and thanks for listening. Go Hawks.